Hi, everybody. This is Dr. David P. Perrodin, and welcome to the Week 2 Fireside Chat for Educational Leadership 655, People Services, and Non-Discrimination. And wow, it has been a very chilly week. I want to welcome Renee to the class. She will be joining us on Monday. So week 2 begins on Monday, January 26th, and ends on Sunday, February 1st. So a recap. A very solid start to class, but please make sure that you are making your post every Thursday to the discussion threads and then the other assignments that are required in class. Yes, it is asynchronous, but please refer to the course calendar in the syllabus to make sure that you are fulfilling all of the course requirements on their due dates. Again, you need to make 4 total posts by Sunday night. I know we don't have a lot of students in here, so you can make those posts a little bit more brief if you want to. So some questions and reflection from our week 1. Thank you for sharing about your experiences with outside agencies providing mental health and counseling services in schools are growing and promoting services in the least restrictive environment. Those models also require us to be aware of supplanting services. So if mental health providers coming into school providing services, what is the student then not receiving? Just that we're aware of that and we can balance that out. Some of you discovered student or parent handbooks to have readability levels kind of off the charts, like college levels. So that's a great way to kind of tackle something in the pupil services realm with relative ease and make a change. So we're going to take our section on bullying in the handbook and do a readability check, and then also run it past some parents and students on what their perceptions and interpretations of these paragraphs are, and then work with the language and get it to be in a more readable range versus 12th grade level. Arlie noted that the reading levels in her district handbooks were high, and she also expressed that trying to find handbooks and trying to find things on the district website was a little bit maze-like, and I think that experience is pretty common. So Arlie, you work for the school, so if you have that experience, what's the experience of a parent who's logging in and checking the website and trying to navigate? So I think that is really, again, an interesting piece is to look at the parent facing side and to involve parents and say, are you able to find the bullying form or the process and how long it takes them, or even at a staff development, how long it takes your own staff to find that. Arlie also noted that in a virtual setting where she works, questions come up of, do students with other health impaired or EBD come in already identified with that because of experiences that maybe exacerbated those conditions in a brick and mortar school. So when you look at the disability population in a solely virtual school, how do you kind of tease out, I guess, what the factors were that contributed to how many students have OHI, EBD, speech language, and so forth? So that was really an interesting reflection that Arlie made. And when I responded, I noted that I have friends who have their students, their children enrolled in virtual schools. One of them was because they perceived that the brick and mortar setting exacerbated bullying and harassment that their student was perceiving or being the recipient of, or just kind of observing. Another friend of mine has a child with autism in elementary school and said, it's just too constrained in the brick and mortar school that you have so many classes available at 4th grade, and then you have to wait till 5th grade to get your other classes in 6th. I want my child to be able to take some 6th and 7th grade classes, maybe some tech classes and things like that. And I can do that if I enroll in this online school. I have the flexibility where I didn't have it in my brick and mortar school. Mason noted that 19 of 76 students in his setting have an autism diagnosis. So that's 25%, well above the state average. But he also highlighted that in his setting and with students that he serves, These are students who have a hearing impairment or are deaf. So looking at interpreting assessments and how assessments then are taken from English to ASL, and how you conduct an assessment that might have had 10,000 children that it was, we're in the number group, we're in the to get the baseline, to get your standard scores, but really, maybe only one of those students had a hearing impairment. So here's where the DPI has really helped out pupil services directors in the last few years, and they've given more professional judgment to IEP teams to make the eligibility determination. So it's not as reliant upon standardization scores as it was in the past. So I think that's a point uh, really well made by Mason, is saying when you have a low instance population and you try to apply a standardized test to them, it often doesn't work very well. So you have to bring in a lot of observations and interviews and other parts into the formative process of that assessment. And Mason also noted that the student handbook, there are opportunities and challenges to convert the text handbook English to ASL. And what would that maybe look like? Would you have, some short videos that you would link out then from the digital link to the handbook on the website? I think it's pretty intriguing. So really brilliant thought there. Sarah reviewed her district's website, and the handbooks are online. So she found that several of the handbooks were above the age 18 reading levels. Right there is an inroad to make some positive change in pupil services, increase accessibility. She didn't discover anything in the student handbook about bullying, but there was a link after the online student handbooks. So again, here's where I would say ask the end users if the student handbook genuinely is meant for students. Get a group of 3, 4, 5 students together and go through small segments of the handbook and see if they're able to identify what it means, and if they're able to then act upon the different protocols in there. Like, if you were the recipient of bullying, what would you do per the handbook? Or if there was a threat, or if you were seeking to speak with a counselor about mental health support. So again, bring in the end users. Sarah also noted that each of the schools has its own handbooks. So what that immediately tells me is it's a strong site-based managed district, which is fine. But as a pupil services director, you need to have that inter-rater reliability across all of your sites. So if you have 5 elementary schools, how they students in those schools or parents report bullying should be consistent across all of those schools. The procedure, the forms, the process, right? So there are some things that need inter-rater reliability. So that's where, as a pupil services director, it can be difficult with site-based management when a principal is saying, well, this is how we're doing things. It needs to work this specific way in this school. So that is, again, maybe like a scope and sequence document for that, for mental health, for concerns, signs of suicide, so forth, that there is inter-rater reliability. And that's very clear from billing to billing, not only for the students, but for the staff or for parents that have children that attend different buildings. And Sarah also identified a link where it was contact this person, right? But they either weren't with the district anymore or not in that role. So the question comes up when you find that is, who do you contact to change that, right? If they're supposed to contact this person about, if somebody is homeless, here's your homeless liaison, and that person has changed, who has the authority to then update that website or put in a work request for that website to get updated? So those are great questions. Again, thanks for analyzing your district special education numbers and 504. We are seeing trends in long COVID symptoms, and I have that identified in class. And I think that is spilling over into OHI and also into 504. IDEA hasn't been reauthorized for 20 years. It's not going to be reauthorized anytime soon. So areas such as long COVID and mental health really don't have a clear area in IDEAS, a disability area. So they go into OHI or they go over into 504. So let's talk about best interest of the child. So this is in your text, School of Errors, Rethinking School Safety in America. Um, so on pages 134 and 135, there is no clear legal definition in education of best interest, but it is something educators are expected to consider on a case by case basis. Best interest is dependent upon professional discretion. Bagley and Stefkovich also agree that there's no consistent definition of best interest of child. A content analysis of over 60 law review articles use the term best interest of the students or a variation of it. For example, best interest of students, best interest of children. There was no common theme and no shared use. So that again is something as a pupil services director that you want to get a feel for how your staff interpret and define best interest, how your administrators identify and define best interest, right? If you have strong site-based management like Sarah has, what does that look like from billing to billing? What does it mean to act in the best interest? So I think getting some inter-rater reliability with that is very important. So your learning team, we only have one learning team in this class, so all of you will be working together in that team, and I do have your email information shared in there. So in the syllabus, you'll understand the assignment. You have a student who will be moving to your district. His name is Bruce. He's in elementary school, and he has an allergy, a food allergy. So within this plan, and again, it's very well detailed out, I want you to focus on the pupil services side. There's certain things you need to address in the plan, but for example, pupil services, how will you make parents and students aware of the allergy? How will you mitigate potential allergy bullying, right? How will Bruce have access to field trips and other activities, right? Like, so just go in, and it's a very authentic scenario. And sometimes people will email me when class is done and say, we had this scenario play out in our district a month after this class concluded. And I went back to this assignment and I kind of followed the steps with our team, and that was able to kind of get us up to speed and get prepared for this incoming student much quicker than had we kind of not gone through this process. Looking ahead to week 2, we arrive at the intersection of disability and discrimination. We'll consider student allergies and how non-discrimination practices apply. We will also become aware of the DPI's resources for safe schools for lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender students. Also, consider your Board of Education policies and school practices to promote awareness and to mitigate discrimination in these areas. We will explore well-intentioned decisions for students with disabilities that are actually passive discrimination there. An example would be an IEP team that exempts a student from participating in safety drills because the student has autism and the drills dysregulate the student, and the student then has a really rough day. Well, that isn't helping the student if there is an authentic situation that they encounter, whether it be a fire or an intruder or something like that. So all students need to participate in the drills. And if they're not, then we need to examine the drills and how we can modify that or write a goal for a student to practice participating in drills. And I do have that provided in this class from a class I had with students I think 2 years ago, where we developed a goal for a student with autism. And we worked collectively as a class on how we might go about doing this and what the objectives would be. So, and special education and pupil services are largely the result of the extent taken. In other words, simply giving teachers access to the IEP at a glance is far different than a face-to-face discussion or access to the behavior plan or whatever, right? So I see that a lot where, well, we have this, but it's much different to walk down and to meet with a teacher or to have a short discussion about the student than to just say, go look at the IP at a glance, or hey, the behavior plan is on the Z drive, right? So like, you know, be be familiar with it. And when you do these things too, like if there's behavior plans or allergy, um, always put the date that was kind of last reviewed, so people have like a current draft that they're looking at, and then who did that and their contact information. So it's like, oh, I have questions about Bruce's allergy, or I have questions about this behavior plan or safety plan. Well, here it is, but I don't know who to contact about questions, like who put this together, what version is this, right? So, but we are off to, again, a solid start. The big thing is just get in and post. It doesn't have to be anything elaborate. I'm not going to spell check, um, but get in and post, especially with a small enrolled class. Um, the posts really bring the energy to it. So, looking right here, as we get into week 2, you have your discussion threads due on the 29th of January. So make sure that you get those done and you're responding to other discussion threads. And then, touch base this week with the learning team members and figure out how you're going to take on this plan for Bruce. But if you do get behind in post, just go ahead and make your post, or contact me if something is going, wonky, where you've kind of fallen out of sync with the class. And again, everything is asynchronous, but we do have something due every week in this class. So make sure that you print the class calendar, which I have right here. And it's in your syllabus, right? And that you just are kind of like I'm doing, you're crossing days off to make sure that you're staying on pace with everything. All right, everybody, let's have a terrific week 2 here in Educational Leadership 655.